Hey, Chiswick. I think we're both here for the same thing, and that's Collection Connection, the game that's just an excuse to talk about records. I play the game with my brother, Plastic Eric, who plays his half of the game over on his channel, The Plastic Soundwave Cult. Every Monday, Eric presents an album from his collection that relates to the album that I showed in my previous episode, and every Thursday, I find a new connection to a different album in my collection, and the circle remains unbroken. So these seemingly unrelated albums or artists share some facet or quirk in common, and we challenge you to figure out what that is. This past Monday, Eric showed the 13th album from the Finnish heavy metal act Amorphous, which is the Queen of Time from 2018. I gave it a listen, which I'll talk about briefly, and from that, we slide back almost 40 years to True Colors, the 5th studio album from Kiwi New Waver's Split Enz. And yes, Amorphous is from Finland, so there are Finns in the band, and Split Enz has the brothers Tim and Neil Finn, so there are Finns in that band too. But that ain't it, smart guy. If you think you've identified the actual connection, leave your guess in the comments, where the first successful one will earn a shout out in my brother's next video. But first, let's reveal the connection between the prior pair of albums, those being Rings Around the World from Super Furry Animals and Queen of Time from Amorphous. And the connection, fairly simple, straight ahead one, is that they both had stylized skulls on the cover, kind of smack in the middle of the album cover. Once again, I'm not here to make this after Eric's video has been posted, so I don't know if anyone got the connection, but I feel in my heart somebody had to get this one. It's a fairly straight ahead one. It's visual. And yeah, so hopefully somebody got that. But I will move forward with the episode. So let's get to it. All right, so Eric showed Queen of Time from Amorphous, which now all of a sudden, is that the name of the album? Yeah, that is the name of the album, Queen of Time. And I give it a listen. It was listenable for not being my kind of music. Eric talked about the Cookie Monster vocals. Too much of those are a big turnoff for me personally, but as Eric mentioned, he has sort of two different ranges that the lead singer sings in, and the other one is much more palatable to me. And the music, the metal of it, they have a lot of sort of subdivisions on their names, sometimes folk metal, sometimes symphonic metal, but it was immaculately recorded. And so a lot of the galloping rhythms, very Wagnerian, that sort of heavy metal, makes me think of Iron Maiden at times, minus the vocals. Bruce Dickinson doesn't sound anything like either of the two modes that the singer sings in for Amorphous, but that made it a fairly solid listen. I was only able to listen to it in the car, so I did get kind of a immersive experience. I was in the car by myself, but I wasn't able to kind of look at it track to track. But for what it is, Scandinavian heavy metal, which is a whole thing. I think Eric has several different Scandinavian metal acts, and I know we've done at least one before with Dimmu Borgir. That, for being what it is, never anything that I'm going to buy, but it didn't sound bad, wasn't hard to listen to. I just don't care for the Cookie Monster vocals myself. But with that said, let's look at the connection, which today is from 1980 and is Split Enz, True Colors. Although it is the 5th Split Enz album, it is the album that solidified them sort of as a, maybe not a global force, but globally recognized, even though Tim Finn started the band and it was a fairly large ensemble. A few albums in, his younger brother, Neil Finn, I think when he was still kind of a mid-teenager, joined the band. And this was the album where he kind of had his coming out party a little bit, and the single I Got You, which Neil Finn wrote, is kind of what broke them a little bit around the world. After gaining some notoriety in their home country of New Zealand, And this was the first album that they put out that went to #1 in New Zealand and Australia. So there was a new plateau that they reached at home, but thanks to I Got You, they started getting some airplay outside of New Zealand. They are generally acknowledged as the first New Zealand rock act to hit the mainstream kind of anywhere outside of their home country. So that's kind of cool. Neil Finn obviously went on to form Crowded House. After this, after a few more albums, the evolution of Split Enz is a little weird in that, again, Tim Finn founded it, Neil Finn joined, Tim Finn ended up leaving after this, well, maybe not directly after this album, but soon after this album. And then it kind of ended as Neil's project. Still a band, and I think some of the longtime members of that band, made it feel like he was sort of less of a leader in that group, maybe to himself, and so that's why he went ahead and formed Crowded House with Paul Hester, who was playing drums for Split Enz by the end, and Nick Seymour on bass, where then it was kind of more clearly his idea of the pop music that he wanted to write. It's strange that Split Enz is very kind of a whizzy, busy, new age sound. It had matured a little bit by the time of True Colors, but it almost has looped back around. It was a band that felt dated for a long time. So like in the 90s, 2000s, you listen to some Split Enz and you think, wow, that really sounds of its time, which still sort of remains true, and yet that sound has kind of come back around and it just sounds like kind of jamming music. I think maybe at this point, all of that sort of new wave and new romantic and post-punk and all that kind of stew of stuff that came out of the punk movement in 1977, all the sort of stylistic changes that shook up the system back then have all been just fed into the soup at this point, and they're just influences that people can draw on, and it makes what once sound dated because people stopped making music that sounded exactly like that. Now in this sort of larger referential pool that you have to listen to music from, it's a style that people can adopt and make. So these whizzy keyboards that were kind of the first thing to go from Crowded House, they went into the Hammond organ and things that were a lot more stately and sophisticated. In any case, this was kind of a breakthrough album for them. It starts off with Shark Attack, so it comes blazing out from the beginning, a high octane Tim Finn song that is a lot of fun, but is very much in that sort of whizzy busy style. And I'm not even sure at this point, because of the visuals being what they are, they had a very sort of Harlequin-y made up look early on, and I'm not sure. The style was kind of an integral part in the same way like Roxy Music had it, and so you can maybe see a little bit there. They had gone maybe less heavy into the makeup, but were still wearing very stylized suits and things. That was another thing that kind of went away with Crowded House and Tim Finn's solo career, is that they lost some of that art school sort of thing that they had going on and just became, regular clothes wearers, or at least big distinctive blazer wearers in Neil Finn's case. But it's fun. I think I started because I started as a Crowded House fan. It was Don't Dream It's Over. That was the first thing that really brought me in to the Finn sort of musical diaspora. I'm not sure if I'm using that right, but that's the word that popped into my head, so I said it. And the vague awareness I had of a little bit of things like I Got You, and maybe One Step Ahead, some things that I may have heard while in my time in England. I don't think that they ever did anything really in the States, Split Ends. And they spent a lot of time, I think, in England maybe trying to break outside of New Zealand and Australia. I totally forget where my sentence started, so I'm going to start a new sentence. A lot of this stuff... Oh, I know what I was saying. The first thing that I got was History Never Repeats, which was just the best of from Split Ends. I mean, they were done by the time I was starting to buy records, and oftentimes I would start with a best of from a band and decide from there if I wanted to go deeper. And I wasn't really sure at the time, but I ended up getting a copy of True Colors. I probably found it for cheap somewhere, but of the 11 tracks on the History Never Repeats, 4 of them are from this album. Poor Boy, I Hope I Never, and What's the Matter with You, and I Got You. So a significant chunk of that album made what they considered the best of Split Ends at that time. And I do like a lot of what is new to me, or was new to me at the time, on this album. I really like Shark Attack. I love the energy of it. It's a lot of fun. Double Happy is an instrumental that has a lot of fun momentum to it. Nobody Takes Me Seriously was one that I picked up on early. I think that made it on maybe one of my cassette mixes. And Missing Person, from the sound of it, is another Neil Finn composition. So he was primarily Neil Finn. He was, I don't know, the George Harrison of the band for a little time before he kind of took over. So Tim Finn was doing most of the vocals and most of the writing, I think, maybe in tandem with other members. I'm not sure exactly who wrote what. I didn't have a lot of time to do a lot of research, so I'm just kind of regurgitating a little bit of what I know about the album. It came out in initially 4 different color variations. I think this was the most common, but it had 4 different colors, and then was reissued in another 4 different colors. And I think since then it's even had another handful. I know when it went gold in New Zealand, they did kind of a gold variation, and somebody, Noel Crombie maybe from the band, has said that there's like 11 ultimately different variants of the cover. And you can see it kind of looks just like Shapes at first, very stylized, but it is the word ends. There's the E, and here's the N, and here's the Z. And they started off as just Split Ends, E-N-D-S, like split ends on your hair. They stylized it. I don't know if they stylized it specifically because, I like to think that they did, because NZ, the NZ of New Zealand, kind of sneak a New Zealand reference into their name. I'm not 100% sure, or really sure at all. It's pure speculation on my point. I didn't try to verify it. But they did ultimately change the band name to Split Ends, and I like to think that the NZ for New Zealand is what made them, somebody had an epiphany of, hey, we could sneak a little Kiwi reference in there. And I've since bought, when I actually went to New Zealand a handful of years ago, 5-6 years ago now, I bought See Around, which was a later one, which was a Neil Finn version of the band, led, that I think it was their last one, based on the title, See Around, that I found in a record store in Auckland. I wanted to buy something Finn-like while I was in New Zealand, so I bought See Around then. And I think it had like This Is Massive, which was a Paul Hester composition, which is one that I'd heard and liked. Later, this is not my original copy of this either. You can see there's a sticker on here. This is a 40th anniversary sort of remix done by Eddie Rayner, who was in the band. He has revisited this a couple times for a couple reissues. Once, I think, in the early 2000s, and then in 2020 for this version. Has some bonus tracks, kind of all live tracks. Not super my thing, but Fire Drill wasn't bad. Makes me curious to go back and find what album that came on. Initially an I Walk Away, which ended up being a Crowded House song from the first album. And then there's others that kind of confirmed that probably the earlier you go in the Split Enz catalog, the less I'm going to be interested in them. Ninny Knees Up just sounds like, I don't know, just screwing around and not in that compelling a way. But I know that they do have other, thanks to the History Never Repeats, I know that they have other songs that I like. Message to My Girl is a classic, and I See Red is another one in the style of like Shark Attack, very high energy, Tim Finn song that kind of typifies, I think, their early sound. And yeah, so that's kind of what I have. That's what I can think of to say. Again, trying to keep it relatively brief. And I will say that the connection this week is based on the artist and not on these specific albums. So if you think you might know what that connection is, leave your guess down in the comments. And if you're right, Eric will give you a shout out in his video on Monday. But in the meantime, I would recommend, if you're going to get one Split Enz album, I would say this would be it. Falls off a little bit at the end, How Can I Resist Her, and the Coral Sea I find a little less compelling, but up to that point, Wouldn't Dream of It, great song. Double Happy, yeah, Nobody Takes Me Seriously. Missing Person has a good early Neil Finn chorus to it. Poor Boy I like a lot. It's kind of stacked, it's kind of a greatest hits almost all on its own. So this is, if you're going to get one Split Enz album, I would make it this one. And with that, that's all I got. So I thank you for watching. Bye-bye. Good show, Ponsonby.